All right. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining this evening. My name is Erin Ishizaki, and I'm a planner with Mithun, and I just wanted to welcome everyone and say thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us this evening and joining us for our community open house. Hopefully you're in the right place. We're here today for the Northeast 85th Station Area Plan for the City of Kirkland, and we're here to talk about the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. So I wanted to say welcome and just give an overview of the agenda for this evening. We'll first hear a welcome from Adam Weinstein, the Director of Planning, and then give a quick introduction on some of the tools we'll be using this evening from Becca with Mithun. We'll give a bit of an overview on a little bit more about draft EIS statements and how to read them and comment on them from Lisa with Burke, and then give an overview of the alternatives and analysis, myself and Brad, and then really most of the time this evening will be dedicated to small group discussions. That'll be starting at 6:45. We'll report back and hear back on what folks had to say, and then give a quick recap of next steps and how you can participate and comment within the planning process. So that's our agenda for this evening. Just want to again say thank you everyone for joining us. And if we don't have any other questions, we'll be moving on to an introduction in just a minute and a welcome from Adam. And I wanted to also just note that while probably many folks are joining on screen via Zoom, that this meeting is also available via phone. So just a reminder that not everyone may be viewing the screen and the presentation tonight. So thank you again, and really appreciate Adam being here to kick us off for the discussion.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Erin. Yeah, I just want to welcome everybody here as well. I'm Adam Weinstein. I'm the director of the Planning and Building Department, and really excited to be here tonight. This is a fantastic project that encompasses so many of the different things that the city is working on and prioritizing these days. And it also builds, of course, on the very long legacy of planning in Kirkland. Just have a couple of minutes of introductory remarks. I know the key point of the conversation tonight is to hear from members of the community, but I wanted to thank members of the Planning Commission who are here and members of the City Council who are here, who have provided just a lot of leadership through this process. I'm probably going to miss a couple of people. It's hard to see who's here, but just wanted to thank specifically from the Planning Commission, Carter Bagg, Angela Rosman, Rodney Rutherford, Kaya Allen, and Scott Reiser, who are here. And also wanted to thank, of course, our City Council as a whole. The City Council members who I see that are here are Amy Falcone and Deputy Mayor Arnold. Hopefully, again, I'm not missing anybody. And I also wanted to thank, of course, city staff and the Mithun consultant team who have worked really hard on this process to date. And last but not least, of course, I want to thank the community members, all of you who are here. This is a really fantastic turnout. There's a lot of interesting things happening in the news right now. So I know there's lots of things drawing your attention right now. So just really appreciate that everybody has come together to provide some feedback on our planning effort. So this is a planning effort, of course, that reflects the community, both the past community and our present community. And with that in mind, I just want to acknowledge that the study area of this project is on the traditional land of the first people of Kirkland, and that we and the plan honor with gratitude the land itself and the tribes which have cared for it since time immemorial. This is a project that's going to be grounded in place, and the first peoples of Kirkland were certainly people who were grounded in place as well. And so I hope that can influence the planning process, and it has. So in terms of project overview, just want to really reiterate a key point, which is that this project is not about the BRT station itself. That's a project that Sound Transit and WashDOT have jurisdiction over. It's really about the land around the BRT station, the bus rapid transit station. So we're looking at a half-mile radius around the station. land uses, environmental protection, transportation. It's really easy to get absorbed in the thematic topics of the supplemental EIS and the planning process in general, air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, transportation. What this fundamentally is, what this planning process fundamentally is looking at the question of what kind of community do we imagine here in the station area, and how do we build a community that reflects Kirkland's values of diversity, inclusion, sustainability, and economic vitality. Next slide. Of course, it's hard to make introductory remarks like this without mentioning the thing that's hanging over all of us right now, which is the pandemic. And I don't want to underemphasize the catastrophic effects that the pandemic is having on our community, and we'll be debating the ramifications of the pandemic for years. But in looking at the community and how it's responded to the pandemic, I think there are some impacts that have been positive. One, I think, which we see again by just traveling around Kirkland and around the region, is that the built environment around us is not as fixed as we might think it is. So here in Kirkland, streets have been repurposed for pedestrians, parking spaces on the street and in parking lots have been repurposed for small businesses. Parks have been used for things like gyms. Forest schools have sprung up to allow kids to learn outdoors in a socially distanced fashion. And so this station area plan is really a chance to take some of those lessons that we've learned, but to reimagine the built environment around the BRT station on a large scale, and then to meet the project objectives that are listed on this slide. So things like designing a built environment that's inclusive and diverse and that welcomes the entire community, obviously creating value for the community, looking at things like community benefits such as affordable housing, and then perhaps most importantly, promoting the really high quality of life that we have here in Kirkland. So just to go on to the next slide, obviously in this era of 24/7 social media feeds, we've tended to become a little bit myopic in our policy outlook, right? We're looking at our own Twitter feeds and our own Instagram feeds and our own Facebook feeds. And so I hope that we can take this really marvelous opportunity tonight to really listen to and understand our neighbors and their thoughts on the future of the station area plan, again, to promote the objectives that the city really holds dear: civic engagement, innovation, and diversity. And I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody's comments tonight, and just want to thank everybody for being here.
Great, thank you so much.
Great, so as the bulk of our time will be spent in small group discussion, we just wanted to go over some open house rules with everyone. Pretty straightforward. Everyone is welcome. All viewpoints need to be shared and heard. So it's helpful if one person speaks at a time. You respect the views of others, and you listen to understand, not to debate, and be ready to expand on your viewpoints. And of course, hate speech is not tolerated. So if you have specific personal comments that you want to make on the plan, you're welcome to submit them afterwards as well, and we'll be having a discussion about what everyone thinks will help the community develop in an equitable and sustainable fashion tonight. Tonight I'm going to be helping with the technical side of the meeting, so I just wanted to go over a few of the Zoom tools that we'll be using. So you can join by phone or Zoom if you're on your browser. If you're joining via phone, you can mute yourself with *6. So once we get in our group discussions and you want to share your opinion with us, just push *6. And on your computer, just look for the little mute microphone button. I will be on the other end of the chat line. Any chats you send, just go directly to me, and I'll be helping out with any IT questions you might have. So if you're having trouble seeing something, if you can't hear someone, any technical questions you have, feel free to just chat, and I can help you out to the best of my ability. And once we're going to be doing our small group discussions in Zoom breakout rooms. If you're not familiar with those, once we get to that stage of the presentation, you'll see this little dialog box pop up. You just have to push join, and then you'll be in a whisked away to a small room, and you'll have a discussion with around 10 people. On your phone, you just have to wait a little bit longer, and you'll automatically be organized into your breakout group. You'll get another similar pop-up when it's time to return to the main session, and then you'll come back to this big group that we're in now. If you do finish your questions earlier in your group, there's an option to leave your breakout group and come back to the main session. We'll have a poll up and some other opportunities to participate if you would like to look at those before we all come back together for some quick closing points. And I think Erin will take it from here.
Great. So just as a overview of where we are within the stationary area planning process, just wanted to share that with folks. We began our work in spring last year, really doing initial analysis to understand opportunities and constraints, developing a vision and concepts. Over the course of the fall and this early winter, we are now, based on the outreach, that analysis, and community open house and engagement, we are in the process of analyzing alternatives that form the draft supplemental EIS for the project. So right now is a moment where we have 3 alternatives we'll be sharing with you all. That have components that can be mixed and matched. We have analysis on those, and our goal of this stage is to develop a preferred alternative, which will happen through upcoming meetings, both informed by the comment and discussion through public comment and the workshop this evening, as well as you can see the dates of some of the upcoming Planning Commission meeting next week and City Council meeting. January 5th also marked the date of the publication of the draft supplemental EIS. And so that's a 30-day comment period. So over the course of the next month is a great time to provide your input and thoughts on those draft alternatives. The goal is to develop then, based out of that, a draft plan, to share that again through a round of engagement, and to have a final plan for the stationary in place by summer. And Lisa, it would be great if you could just walk us through the EIS process. Thanks.
Thanks, Erin. So this is an integrated planning and environmental review process that Erin outlined before. So the nature of this is that the environmental review process can help the city formulate the ultimate station area plan. We started with the State Environmental Policy Act process of scoping the contents of the environmental review and the alternatives last spring. And based on that input, developed those alternatives and concepts that Erin described. And then we're here in the second box of preparing and issuing the draft EIS and conducting a 30-day comment period. This document is building on the city's prior environmental review for the comprehensive plan back in 2015. So it's focused on this area and focused on a sort of more detailed area of subjects. Once we develop a preferred alternative, which will be helped by your comments this evening, then there will be a final environmental impact statement that will respond to those comments, and will also evaluate a preferred alternative that is likely to mix and match features of the alternatives we're going to share with you tonight. There's a special planned action ordinance that would come with this environmental review process. the idea is if future development fits in the range of the analysis and meets all the mitigation measures that come out of the environmental review, in addition to meeting the code, then they don't have to do additional SEPA environmental review. So it gives more certainty to the community and to the future applicants to know what the rules of the road are to meet those and not have to redo the paperwork. And so if that ordinance is adopted, then the city would review the permits for consistency with that to streamline the permitting. This is a process the city has applied elsewhere in downtown. So I'll share a little bit about the contents of the document. It's available on the project website. We'll share the link again in a moment. But the contents follow the State Environmental Policy Act guidelines, and it's structured to have a summary. Then it shares details on the proposal and alternatives, which we will also share with you tonight. And then the third chapter goes into an analysis of each alternative and compares and contrasts the alternatives for what are the environmental implications and what kinds of mitigation measures would work to reduce those impacts. And then it has other supplementary material references and appendices. The focus in chapter 3 is on the topics that you'll see there: air quality and greenhouse gas, surface water and stormwater, land use, plans and policies, aesthetics, transportation, public services. That includes schools, parks, police and fire, and utilities, which is sewer and water. And so for each topic, there's a discussion of what's happening today. That's the affected environment. What are the conditions today? And then the impacts. What are the implications over the next 20 years if those alternatives are implemented? And then what kinds of mitigation measures would reduce those impacts? And because this is an area-wide analysis and it's to support a plan and form-based code, you'll see that the mitigation measures are at a similar level of detail. They identify potential regulations or physical improvements or programs that could help reduce impacts. And then if we were to apply those mitigation measures, what would be the residual effect? Would we have fully mitigated, or are there some potential long-term environmental implications? And the city is really seeking your input, and the comments from this evening are part of that 30-day comment period that Aaron introduced from January 5th to February 5th. And there's also opportunities to comment individually, but the neat situation we have is that you would be able, through your comments, to help influence this plan and the environmental review, and it will affect many future projects within this whole area, and it will address cumulative impacts from the overall development. We would really appreciate any ideas you have for possible solutions to mitigate impacts, and what kinds of alternatives or features do you think best meet those objectives? And so when you comment, we would appreciate if you write a letter, for example, or an email, or you respond to the survey, if you can summarize your concerns so we can get the gist of your ideas, but also tell us some specific ideas you have. That will really help shape those alternatives and the environmental review as well as the plan. You could tell us when you review that draft supplemental EIS, where is information that could be made more complete or accurate? What are some of those mitigation solutions, and what features do you like best that would make the best future for this area? So the website location is there near the arrow. So you'll find the full document there. You could start by reviewing the summary in that document and then using that summary, that chapter 1, to help you navigate to other areas you have greater interest in. Formulate your comments so you can send them to Allison at that email address there. And just a reminder that Adam pointed out earlier, There are some specific planning efforts going on for the BRT station and for WashDOT improvements, and anything specific about the station or the interchange should go to WashDOT or Sound Transit. But anything that's about the overall alternatives that we're presenting to you and the response to the station would be what we're interested in the draft SEIS. So again, the ways you can comment, everything today will be summarized and it'll reflect group discussions, and it will be part of what we respond to in the final EIS as well. There's a survey where you can put your own opinions about the alternatives, mitigation options, and other ideas you have, or you can directly write to Allison and either by email or mail. And again, if you have specific comments about the station itself, send those to WashDOT or Sound Transit. And if you're not sure what counts as a comment for our study area or WashDOT or Sound Transit, feel free to reach out to Allison and she can help you.
Great, thank you so much. And I just wanted to just take a quick pause and see, Becca, if you're getting any questions or themes of questions around this first portion about the planning process and the EISs that we might want to take a pause and address at this point.
Nope, no questions so far.
All right. Wonderful.
Oh, well, there is one from Doug. Is it better to separate comments into separate messages for each topic or send all topics in a single message? Which I think you'd prefer a single message, but if you have anything to elaborate on, Allison or Lisa, please jump in.
That's right, Becca. I think it's great if you can put it all in one. It's up to you. We will collect all of them by the end of the comment period if you choose to break it up. But one would be great.
On a related note, Lisa, it sounds like the group discussion from this evening's meeting will summarize as part of comments, but that if you have an individual comment, you should submit it separately. Is that correct?
I think so, because tonight we're going to talk about overall what's happening in broader areas of the study area and broad topics, but folks may have some specific things they want to point out about their property or their part of the quadrants around the interchange that may not come up tonight, and they may want to put those into specifics, or they may have specific ideas for mitigation that don't necessarily come up in the group discussion, and so those would be great to have individually. So we'll summarize tonight's meeting and identify the themes and respond to those in the final EIS, and we will also respond to all the individual comments that come in either through the survey or through letters or emails.
Wonderful, thank you. One final item before we move on to giving the highlights of the alternatives. It would be great, Allison, if you could just introduce yourself and say a quick hello, as well as Jeremy as some of the key staff leading the effort on the city side.
Sure thing, I'll hop on. My name's Allison Zeich. I'm a senior planner with the city, and I'm the project manager for the station area plan.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm Jeremy McMahon. I'm the Deputy Director of the Planning and Building Department, and I'm helping Allison with this project.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Well, let us get into the alternatives. Brad.
Great, thanks, Aaron. I'm gonna request remote control. Good evening, everybody. My name is Brad Barnett. I'm an urban designer at Methuen. We're excited to talk through these alternatives with you tonight. I'll try to keep this brief and at a overview level, as Aaron mentioned, and then we'll get into more details in our group discussion. So as has been shown already, we're looking at roughly a half-mile area, which is roughly a 10-minute walk around the future BRT station. You can see in green the final boundaries for the study area that we're looking at in this project. And we've developed 3 alternatives based on feedback that we've gotten from you, from the community, from Planning Commission and City Council input, as well as the analysis process we've been going through. We'll talk more about those 3 alternatives in just a moment. But first, as we talk about what's in these alternatives, there's some things that were held consistent. So the graphic you see on the right of the screen here is from a previous version. If you've participated before, this is likely familiar to you. This initial growth framework of where growth goes, where we focus density, where we focus on preserving existing neighborhood fabric and character, where mobility investments would go. Those things are generally held constant across all 3 of the alternatives. We don't change where those things would or would not happen. Similarly, the BRT station, which is happening within our study area, but not a core part of our work to control, is held constant. We didn't change the BRT service or the station design. There's an active transportation plan that the city is doing as a parallel effort to this, and we've incorporated those initial bike and pedestrian improvements into the starting point for all 3 alternatives as well. Similarly, environmental goals that come from other planning efforts that the city has done in the past, like the comprehensive plan, are consistent across all 3 of these alternatives. And finally, the public services that are provided, such as schools, fire, police, and so forth, those are all held consistent across the alternatives. So you might be asking what changes or what's different. So while the locations for areas of change are held constant, the amount of change and physical form of that growth, how tall buildings are, what kinds of buildings they may be, what types of investments in the public realm might happen, those things change across scenarios or alternatives. Similarly, supportive services for the BRT station, like shuttle and parking strategies, change across alternatives. The level and types of bike and ped improvements, what kinds of bicycle lane or what kinds of sidewalk improvements, for example, those can change across alternatives. And similarly, the level of environmental strategies, public services, and community facilities investments also can change across alternatives. And then finally, of course, when you make all of those different changes to the alternatives, the impacts and the benefits towards the objectives of the project are reflected in the differences in those alternatives as well. So to that point, there are certain transportation network changes that we assume are happening based on the fact that they've already been funded and in some cases already implemented. Many of these are along Northeast 85th Street. I won't talk through all of these, but they include things like additional lanes for travel, sometimes additional turn lanes, the interchange itself, that's number 4 that you see there, being designed and constructed by WashDOT. And so those sorts of things that we already know are happening, those are included across all 3 of the alternatives. And so at a high level, I'll talk through each of these alternatives now. I'll summarize them and then talk through some of the elements of each alternative. So the first alternative is what we call a no action alternative. This reflects the existing zoning that is there today and current plans such as the comprehensive plan and neighborhood plans that are already adopted today by the city. The second alternative is what we're calling guiding transit-oriented growth. This is an action alternative that would allow moderate growth around the transit that's coming to the station area. And it would focus that growth primarily on existing commercial areas such as the Rose Hill Business District. The third alternative we're calling transit-oriented hub. This would be similar to alternative 2, except it would allow for the most growth to support transit-oriented development. And again, it would focus it on existing commercial areas such as Rose Hill. There's some additional detail that we'll talk through as we step through each of these one by one, but you can see that in general, they're going from allowing less new growth and development in alternative 1 to additional growth in alternative 2 to the most growth in alternative 3. And that is reflected both in that development row that you can see in terms of the heights that are allowed, particularly in the Rose Hill area, but also the kinds of mobility and environmental improvements that are made and the amount of housing, including affordable housing and jobs that can be provided based on those development strategies. And as Aaron already mentioned, our goal tonight isn't as much to choose one alternative and vote for it, but really to identify the pieces of each alternative that you think work or don't work, so that we can combine those together into a preferred alternative in the future. And we can talk more about that in the small group discussion. As mentioned, each alternative varies significantly in the amount of growth that it analyzed. This is looking at potential growth. It's not forecasted growth. And so these range from the red that you see here, the orange is potential households by 2035, and the blue is potential jobs by 2035. And these range from adding 2,700 households in the alternative 1 no action, up from a current total of 1,900 households, to on the alternative 3, as many as 10,000 households total in the study area. And we can talk more about those specifics as we get further into the presentation. So I'll go through each of these in a bit more detail now. Alternative 1, as I mentioned, is a no action alternative, and as such, it reflects the existing zoning that's there today. And so you can see this includes mostly commercial zoning in the Rose Hill Business District, low density residential in a lot of the neighborhoods surrounding it. And then in between those extremes, a mix of industrial, medium density residential, and multifamily zoning. The bicycle network and pedestrian improvements for this no action alternative largely reflect the network that's already there today, with the addition of some improvements that will come with the interchange itself along 85th and connections into some adjacent streets from that interchange to complete the bike network. Alternative 2, this is looking at the allowable heights in alternative 2, guiding mixed use growth. As I mentioned, this one will allow moderate growth around the transit station itself, focused primarily on that area on the right, the Rose Hill commercial area. This would allow heights up to 150 feet right up against I-405. That would be that red color that you see there. And then it would step down to 25 to 30 feet in existing low density residential neighborhoods. It's worth also noting here that the hatched areas that you see are areas where the zoned height allowed would not change from what's already there today. So much of the area would retain the same zoned height that it has today. It's really just the areas that are not hatched that would change in some way. Along with that increase in growth, there would be additional improvements to the bike and pedestrian network. These would include improvements along Northeast 85th between 6th and 114th to improve the connections between the station and downtown, as well as improvements on parallel streets to 85th to create better connectivity at 90th and streets to the south of 85th. Alternative 3 allows for the most growth. So it's a similar pattern of development as alternative 2, but in this case would allow heights up to 300 feet right against the interchange and I-405, and then again would step down to 25 to 30 feet in the existing low density residential neighborhoods. And just like the previous map that we showed, the hatched areas are areas where the heights would not change from what's already there today. Similarly to alternative 2, the bike and pedestrian network improvements would reflect the level of growth that's coming to the area. And so you can see in Rose Hill, in addition to improvements to existing streets, there's a concept of what we've been calling green streets, these mid-block connections that would help create new bike and pedestrian connections through some of the large blocks that exist in this area that make it harder for bikes and pedestrians to use the area. These lines that we've shown are diagrammatic. They're not intended to show final alignment or number or location of these green street, these mid-block connections, but those dashed lines you see in yellow reflect the general concept of creating a more walkable, bikeable grid in that area. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron to talk through the analysis of these alternatives.
Great. Thank you so much. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense of the range of alternatives that were studied and sort of the overview of the issues and the types of improvements and changes to the policies and plans that were being studied in the alternatives. I will similarly give you an overview of some of the analysis that is included in the draft EIS. And as Lisa said, hopefully a summary will give you a chance to think about areas that you may want to look more into and read some of the details. So again, we're anticipating that the preferred alternative is probably a combination of features within multiple of these alternatives. But one of the important things to look at, especially in this range of potential allowed growth, is how these alternatives are measuring up against the project objectives. So this is one of the main ways that the draft EIS is analyzed. Along the left-hand side here are some of the key objectives within the project values and objective statement that was developed as part of our last phase of work. And you can see here, the alternative one is a no action alternative. So there's not much change that happens to what the current patterns are. And similarly, you'll see there's some opportunity for benefit, but it's a bit limited. As we get into alternatives 2 and 3, which do look at adding more growth and more changes from what the plans are today, you'll see that corresponding there is more opportunity to achieve some of the benefits and additional improvements alongside that growth. So I'll kind of walk through a bit more detail on each of the alternatives and a bit about both how they are meeting the objectives, as well as some key metrics and features of them. For alternative 1, again, that's the no action alternative. So this is basically consistent with the existing zoning and plans that are in place. Just looking again at those project objectives and kind of summarizing those to core values around equity, livability, and sustainability. You can see that in terms of the degree of consistency for most of these objectives, alternative 1 is unlikely to provide substantial benefit in terms of things like affordable housing. It may imply up to 80 or 90 total affordable units over the next 20 years. It's unlikely to support additional opportunities around education and likely to maintain current sort of patterns of transit, walking, and biking, for example. A bit of other information about this no action alternative, as Brad mentioned, this would be a projected growth that would be allowed up to about 800 to 900 total housing units and about just under 11,000 new jobs that could be located in the station area. So that is one area that's just a bit higher than the estimates. And in terms of sustainability, this alternative is unlikely to reduce the district's current carbon footprint and associated per capita greenhouse gas emissions. Just let people glance through that a bit. So the 2 action alternatives, again, both have more change and more potential benefit. For alternative 2, this is a moderate level of growth focused around the transit station. In terms of equity, there's a possibility of producing some affordable housing and increasing the diversity of housing types that are available to folks. It looks like, depending on what some of the policies that may be put into place, that there may be a potential for over 900 affordable units and could possibly add more depending on some of the options. It's potential to add educational opportunities and support opportunities for community benefits. From a livability standpoint, alternative 2 is more likely to encourage transit, walking, and biking, which is hopefully the objective with our station area plan. It does include some of those incremental mid-block connections that Brad mentioned, and is likely to create new employment opportunities across different job sectors. This level of growth is sufficient to be able to support that new transit. And so it's about just over 60 jobs and residents per acre, which is a metric used regionally, and could allow up to 23,700 new jobs. This level of growth and investment is predicted to reduce maybe up to over 30%, so 37% reduction in the per capita, so the per person greenhouse gas emissions, which is pretty substantial. For alternative 3, this is our transit-oriented hub alternative, the highest level of growth. As a result, it's likely to produce significant benefit, including things like affordable housing and housing choices. So potential to achieve more than 1,200 affordable units, likely to improve health equity factors like new on-site open spaces and community gathering spaces. And likely to look at new opportunities for other community benefits. In terms of livability, again, this level of development and density is more than sufficient to support transit. So the metric for that is 76 jobs and residents per acre. And likely to create significant new employment opportunities across sectors. So projecting that it would allow for up to 30,000 new jobs in the station area. Again, a pretty significant opportunity to lower carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions, and predicting up over 40% reduction in per capita greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a comparison of some of the highlights of the analysis that was completed for the alternatives. Also, I wanted to regroup on what Lisa mentioned earlier, which is what issues were studied as part of the draft analysis. So you can see those on the left-hand side here. Again, as a reminder, they're air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, surface water and stormwater, land use and socioeconomics, the relationship with plans and policies, with aesthetics with a focus on public views, on transportation, and then on public services and utilities. And so what this image is indicating is that in all the, each of the alternatives, the plain blue, light blue circles are topics where there were impacts that are able to be mitigated by features within that alternative or that are already in place within existing plans and procedures. There's a few locations that you'll see here where there's a bright blue circle inside. That indicates that there were additional impacts that were identified. And so in those topics for each alternative, the draft supplemental EIS goes through and identifies mitigation options to make sure that those additional impacts can be mitigated. So just quickly highlighting, you'll see that alternative 2 and 3 are consistent, that they both have additional options to mitigate impacts related to surface and stormwater, to land use and socioeconomics, to aesthetics regarding public views, transportation, and public services and utilities. So just a quick note of information regarding the view corridors. The way that the EIS is set up is that it's studying designated public view protection corridors across all of the alternatives. This map here has black arrows on it indicating where those view corridors are located, that are the public view corridors. As many of you know, there's really great views from the location of the interchange of the lake, the mountains, and the skyline. We wanted to just give an overview of the parking strategies that were part of the analysis. There's a couple of different elements to that. The first thing on the left column here, the alternatives do study different changes to parking ratios within the area of the station. And so you'll see there's the existing parking ratios that are required for development are consistent with the no action alternatives. So you can see them for reference here. The action alternatives, both 2 and 3, look at reductions in most cases from the existing parking ratios, which are commensurate with the increased mobility and transit improvements that we anticipate. And in all cases, these were tested in looking at similar markets, and the objective being that all private development parks itself on its own site. There's some additional strategies we are looking at as part of the alternatives, which are the potential for managed parking zones. This might include things like special use zones, for example, for loading areas or emergency access. It could look at things like time restricted parking or requiring pay for parking. And then there's also the potential of looking at district parking within this zone that's dashed with the crosshatch here on the east side of 405 within these alternatives. So these are some example mitigation measures that are being studied to address those impacts. And these are some of the key topics that those mitigation measures are being identified. We'll have this for reference as well in the group discussion, and we wanted just to put this out here in case folks have comment or ideas on which of these they think are really useful, some that you think may not be useful, but wanted to highlight some of the mitigations in order to receive some comments on that. And then I just wanted to mention transportation is one area where there has been a lot of interest, and there's a lot of focus on that within our team. For transportation, there have been intersection and location specific mitigation measures identified for the action alternatives. So I won't go through all of these. You can see there's a focus along Northeast 85th Street here, and more of a focus on the east side of 405, where the growth and area of change is primarily focused. So looking at a variety of different things, from improving the streets to add lanes or look at signal settings, as well as improving mobility options. So that's kind of a high-level overview of the analysis for the alternatives. Again, wanted to just really reinforce that in discussion tonight, we're hoping to learn your thoughts about these alternatives and the elements within them. It is likely that the preferred alternative will be a mixture of ideas from these three. When you're thinking about the alternatives, some sort of future community characteristics to keep in mind, and how you might prioritize those will really help us understand direction for a preferred alternative. So, your feelings about creating and preserving open space, ease of safety and travel by walking and biking versus private vehicles, feelings on limiting or allowing higher building heights and densities, affordable homes and jobs, thinking about the character, both of the neighborhood and green buildings and features, and then as well support for local businesses and ability for people of all walks of life to live in Kirkland. And I think for our discussion tonight, what we really would like to focus on, again, is how these alternatives can help us achieve some of those objectives of the project. So with that, I think we should be ready to move into small group discussion. Becca, is there anything that you wanted to emphasize to kick us off with that?
No, it should shuffle people into rooms fairly quickly, but if you remain in this room for longer than you thought, bear with me. I will move you into your small group momentarily.